Our state budget was due 107 days ago. Pennsylvania is now the only state in the country with legislators who haven't approved an annual spending plan. And that has big implications. We can't fund schools or nonprofits, and the Rape Crisis Center in our city had to shut down its services. Why is this happening? State Senator Nikil Saval represents parts of South Philly, Center City, Southwest Philly, and the River Wards. We're going to try to understand what's broken in Harrisburg. It's Wednesday, October 15th. I'm Trenae Nuri, and we're talking politics. Okay, Senator, can you explain to Philadelphians listening to this episode why we still don't have a budget? Real talk here.
It's a really terrible situation. The fact that we are the only state in the United States that does not have a 2025-26 budget. And frankly, the obstacle is the Pennsylvania Senate Republicans. For months and months, the budget deadline was the end of June. The budget was introduced by Governor Josh Shapiro in February. So we're several months from that introduction, and frankly, several months since the budget deadline. Senate Republicans have not put forward a serious budget proposal that would meet the needs of the Commonwealth. The Pennsylvania House Democrats put forward a proposal that would fund the government at about $50.6 billion. Senate Republicans responded with a flat funding budget proposal, which effectively amounts to a cut to services, since things, of course, become more expensive over time. And they have not come to the table. They've not come to the table when it comes to transit. They've not come to the table when it comes to critical issues that face our Commonwealth, education funding and the like. And often weeks have gone by between meetings, Senate Republicans not coming forward with serious proposals to fund our Commonwealth. And we are now facing critical situations when it comes to school districts. Our own school district in Philadelphia has had to borrow money. We have nonprofits that are furloughing employees. People may have seen that WAR, which is a rape crisis center in Philadelphia, is suspending its employees and its services indefinitely, which is a real blow to survivors, to people in need in Philly and in the region. And we have governments that are furloughing employees from Westmoreland County to Northampton. We have, it's very likely that Allegheny County will start to have to look at its employment situation. This is a tremendous crisis, and it frankly can be laid at the feet of a single party and their members in the Pennsylvania legislature. And many of them feel that they have no obligation to meet the needs of the Commonwealth. Many of them feel that spending cuts are essential. Many of them feel that this is a way to sort of blacken the name of Governor Shapiro, who is running for re-election next year. So there are a lot of different motives at play for withholding real negotiations on a state budget, but all of them amount to the same thing. And that's why we're here today.
I want to get back to what you just mentioned about just how this impacts all Pennsylvanians. But first, Senator, can you explain, you're in Harrisburg today, and we heard that the legislature is in session, but they're mostly just political fundraisers going on. Is fundraising actually happening instead of deal making on this budget?
You could argue that. I mean, there are fundraisers that happen, most session weeks in Harrisburg, usually before or after session. There'll be morning or breakfast events. But I think it speaks to the fundamental issues, which is that legislators are especially Senate Republican legislators are involved in the kind of political and campaign work, but not deeply involved in the negotiating work. And it's what is fundamentally happening is business as usual is sort of taking place outside the building, in terms of political fundraising, but the actual business that needs to take place within the building has been stymied, or is at, at a real stalemate. So I would put it somewhat differently, that I just think that we there is just a lack of seriousness on the part of, a single negotiating party, and in terms of really devoting themselves to the task at hand. The actual session days, we're moving bills of varying merit, I would say, that fundamentally have no budget implication. There is one bill that will be on the calendar, which is essentially to, as you may know, the state treasurer, Stacey Garrity, was also the Republican candidate for governor, or
Or
in
she like
is
basically said that she was interested in that role.
yeah, that's
Hmm.
right. She is seeking that nomination, rather. She is has created a loan program
Yeah, like
that
the
is
low
we
interest rates, which I don't understand this, Senator. Like the state is holding back money and then saying to local governments, nonprofits, school districts, hey, you can borrow some of this money, but you have to pay that back.
it may not it's likely not even constitutional for the state treasurer to do this. So I think this is likely just a ploy, or a kind of um, a it's a form of political theater, such that it can seem as if Republicans in state government are, as quote unquote, solving this situation, or finding a way out of the impasse, when frankly they're the ones who have created it. And
This is
so,
insane.
yeah,
I don't know how many other adjectives that I can come up with to really just illustrate and paint the picture that people's lives are so impacted by this. Like, I'm sure that a Republican senator, a Republican politician understands that. So, why has it been like more than 100 days and we still can't get this together? And at this point, who is going to get this together?
so it's the right question, because there are many people do understand this, including some of my Republican colleagues, and they have constituents who are impacted. They have school districts that are impacted, nonprofits that are impacted. As a party, they are overall devoted not to any particular policy priority at this moment, but to an austerity minded drive to cut services that the state provides, because they refuse to seek revenue, and they believe that the government should spend less. And so, if that is your role, and not every single person believes that, but insofar as there is an anchor to the party, that's where it is weightiest. That's going to make it very hard to come to a proposal that actually meets people's real needs, because of course the government has an obligation to fund, we and has fulfilled that obligation, not necessarily to the degree that it should, but has funds nonprofits, it funds rape crisis centers, it funds school districts. We need to fund those more, we need to fund those equitably, we need to transform how that funding takes place over time. That's one of the reasons I'm in state government, is to build equity and justice into how the state funds services and supports people. But all that being said, we've reached a point where the party is unwilling to meet that need. And so, in order to get this together, we have to build the political pressure, which I think we've been doing on a number of different issues, to show that people will not take this. It's fundamentally our Commonwealth is people have been reaching out to me, which I really appreciate, to talk to me about what happens when we don't fund state government. It's really been an issue when it comes to transit funding. We have gone through had the most engagement on transit funding, in maybe a generation. And it is really important, right? More residents of Philadelphia and in the region, and frankly across the state, are engaged in the fight for public transit funding than in many, many years. And we have a sort of a temporary reprieve on that issue, but only for two agencies in the Commonwealth, and many others are suffering as well without any sort of support. And so I think that that kind of activity, while we're still at a stalemate now, is overall the fundamental solution to building a legislature that really meets people's needs. So I encourage people to continue to contact their representatives and legislator and state senators and representatives and tell them how this budget impasse is affecting them, how it's affecting their school districts, how it's affecting nonprofits that they rely on, how it's affecting county governments, the assistance that they rely on, and and get them to come and help us get them to come to the table.
That's interesting that you use the phrase political pressure. So I'm curious, how are you working with your colleagues across the aisle? And like, I understand what you're saying. It's about, spending less and those sort of things. But is there just like not an understanding, a deeper misunderstanding about the needs of our city and the needs of our region? And what are Democrats? What is the political pressure that you all will use to curb this?
So I think there is a lot of misunderstanding. I think there is while there's a kind of, there is, senators who are outside the Philadelphia region who represent more rural areas, let's say, have a kind of theoretical understanding of what the Philly region contributes to the rest of the Commonwealth, how much the transit system is important, how much the economic drive is from Philadelphia. But fundamentally, they're responding to politics in their own districts and their own region, and that their own constituencies who, so, of course, many of whom actually rely on Philly in their own way. They come to medical appointments in Philadelphia. They go to sports games in Philadelphia. They go to the arts institutions in Philadelphia. But fundamentally, they will work to support constituencies that or also just not just constituencies, but partners and businesses and groups that really support Republican priorities, whether that's lower spending or lower taxes or things like that. I frankly, ordinary people across this Commonwealth, and this is where the power lies, don't support this stalemate. They don't support their funding getting cut or their school districts dipping into reserves and trying to take loans, or
Yeah.
they don't know. People don't want that. School districts will end up paying off that debt for years beyond this budget impasse. That's happened before. And so I think the power that we have, not just as elected officials, but as elected officials who can appeal to ordinary people who are feeling this struggle, is to organize sentiment, across the state. Frankly, even beyond some of our districts, and it's in that popular pressure that we can bring to bear on state government. And that pressure isn't just in legislation. It's not just doesn't happen out in this building. It happens in politics as well. There are elections this year and next year. There are, ways that the composition of the legislature can change. And those are also forms of pressure. And so we need to be working to do both.
And you talked about like just the kind of maybe resurgence, or like people like were paying attention to the whole SEPTA funding debacle.
Yeah.
Do you think that same energy will translate at the polls? Because it's really sometimes hard to get Philadelphians. They're registered, but it's hard to get them to the polls.
Well, it takes real, sentiment and feeling has to be organized, and it will, Philly has declined as a share of overall of aggregate votes as a share of the electorate over years. And I think that that needs to be reversed. And that will not just take people feeling that they need to change state government, but not just elected officials, but organizations, parties working to build year in, year out, day in, day out, the political will to change government. And, I think that thousands of people have been engaged around transit funding, not all of whom were necessarily engaged in politics, but were specifically engaged on the issue of fighting for public transit. Probably many of them weren't totally clear on how important Harrisburg is. I think that a lot of people, even in Philly, do focus on city government and are aware of what happens at city council or city government. But Harrisburg has such an important role, and the role when it comes to education funding, when it comes to transit funding.
I
And
think it's because
so
we don't see Harrisburg often.
it's, yeah, we don't,
It's like
but they got
physically,
it's
and like we really just like
2 hours
don't see
away.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that needs to change. And some of that is, and some of that is what's happening here. Some of that's reporting. Some of that's just real focus and attention on what happens in state government, because it's so, so important. And some of that's on us as elected officials. We have to bring what is happening in Harrisburg to ordinary people. We have to make clear the importance. And I thought the transit fight was one of those moments where there was a real connection between what people were doing in the region and what was going on in Harrisburg, because people really understood and followed very closely and will continue to, I think. And I think that ought to translate into a sense of outrage at people who, many of whom actually represent the Philadelphia region, but failed us when it comes to funding public transit or fighting for adequate funding. We have people who voted to not only rob SEPTA and other transit authorities of capital funding and give it to operational funding, but also to take some of that money and give it to rural roads and bridges, to raise fares. They voted to raise fares biannually in perpetuity. They voted to ban overdose prevention centers near any transit stop across the Commonwealth. They voted to strip our local district attorney of the ability to prosecute crimes on transit. They voted for all of these things. They have to be held accountable. And, and we need to have elected officials who really understand the role of transit, who believe that it can be funded adequately, who support the proposals that have come out of the Pennsylvania House to bring accountability to the system and to bring real sustained funding to the system. We have elected officials that represent the region that didn't do that. And I think that transit advocates know that and are ready to fight for a different composition of the legislature and for a different model.
Okay, Senator Saval, what's next? How long will this last?
We are pushing for this to come to a solution now, right? I mean, I think that we're well past the point that we're months and months past the point, frankly, that a lot of us thought that we would be. And we're frankly working to find different levers, ultimately, the biggest of them being popular sentiment to end this budget crisis. I mean, I really encourage everyone who is listening to this to reach out to their elected officials, including me, to indicate what is at stake in this budget fight for them. What is at stake when it comes to sustained transit funding? What is at stake when it comes to equitable school funding, which we are pushing, which is another major issue that we need to make a further down payment on in year 2 of the first, sort of multi-year plan to bring equity to our school districts across the Commonwealth, and especially the school district in Philadelphia, to fund nonprofits in their ability to serve people when it comes to domestic violence, when it comes to rape crisis, when it comes to food supports and nutrition. All of that, a lot of that gets done at the state level. And so where people are suffering, they need to let their elected officials know. And that is one of the critical ways that we can bring an end to this stalemate. And I then encourage everyone to continue to stay engaged when it comes to issues of this kind and to stay engaged when it comes to politics as we move forward.
Right. You said stay engaged. But in the backdrop of what we're talking about, too, is the federal government has shut down.
Yeah.
And that's in addition to the state dysfunction that we've been talking about. So, Senator, when a Philadelphian calls you on the phone or sends an email, or I don't know if people are writing letters, what do you tell them? What do you say to win a voter back? Like, people's trust has been broken in some cases, or people may not have had trust in the first place. But what do you say to that Philadelphian when they call and tell you services have been disrupted and it is really hurting them?
Well, one is I understand, right? We understand. Many of us I speak for myself. I got into government, or I was moved to get into politics and to organizing by my own failed trust in government. Especially, I grew up during the forever wars in the 2000s and 2010s, when the United States was clearly spending millions, billions, maybe trillions of dollars on overseas wars, rather than supporting housing and lowering the cost of living and in the United States. And they continue to feel that, right? They continue to see the United States, in frankly, enabling a war crimes and a genocide in Palestine, but failing to make to make real changes here at home. And so, one, we have to, all across the board, people are struggling with the cost of groceries. They're struggling with the cost of housing. They're struggling with a number of different costs. You have to understand that. I mean, like that's a real crisis. So, but at that basis of understanding is that fundamentally things can change if we devote ourselves to to pushing our state government and our federal government to recognize the needs of their people. And right now we have a lot of people in state and federal government who have in various ways inured themselves to, or are failing to listen to the calls of people who are struggling right now. And many of them see again that the cost of that the way that they believe that the way to solve this situation is to cut government spending and to reduce federal outlays. But most people don't share that view. And most people don't share that that's the way that we will get to a society that we deserve. And so, what I feel is I again appreciate people reaching out, because one, for me, it reminds me of what the goal is of state government and what the goal is of elected officials, which is to really fight to serve people and to solve crises of this kind.
But do
But
you
two,
still
it's
believe that the government works in this state?
I believe that the government can work in this state. Yes, I absolutely do believe that. Do I believe it's working right now? No, that would be a profound misapprehension of what's happening. The state government is failing in many ways to serve the Commonwealth, but it absolutely can be the instrument that serves this Commonwealth. It can be an instrument that serves people who want to send their kids to a good public school. It can be an instrument that allows people to find affordable housing. It can be the instrument that allows people to breathe clean air and drink clean water. Right? These are things that the state has an obligation to do for for the residents of this Commonwealth. And I'm absolutely determined to, as a member of a big body, but not just as like a member of this body in state government, but as a resident of Philadelphia, as a parent raising children who go, who go to public schools, right? Or so it's not trivial for me, but also I remain an optimist in the ability to change government and to make it work to serve the needs of its people. So, absolutely.
Senator Saval and I will continue our conversation after the break.
Hi, I'm Michael Ziviak, Chief Revenue Officer of CityCast. Why do most of us want to learn a new language? It's because we want to speak it out in the real world with real people. Babbel gets you there fast. My daughter's a senior in high school, and after she graduates, we're taking a father-daughter trip to Spain. I know, she's spoiled, but that's on me. I'll be honest, my Spanish right now is pretty much tops out at "Donde está la biblioteca?" But when we get there, I want to actually talk to people, order food, and really connect with the locals, not just stumble through the basics. That's why I'm starting with Babbel. Learning a language with Babbel is all about small steps, big wins, and progress you can actually track and feel. And with how busy things get here at CityCast, I love that Babbel's bite-sized, 10-minute lessons fit perfectly into my day, whether it's between meetings or while I'm having coffee in the morning. I'm really excited to start picking up real-world Spanish before our trip so we can experience Spain in a more meaningful way. Right now, Babbel has a special deal for our listeners. Get up to 55% off your subscription at babbel.com/citycast. That's BABBEL.com/citycast for up to 55% off. Rules and restrictions may apply. Gracias and adios.
Senator, you sound hopeful. Like you said, you sound optimistic. You're a journalist. You've been an activist who's organized labor unions in California, and then you moved to Philly and then organized hospitality workers. Why was that important for you to continue that work here in Philly and then transition into politics?
Well, when I moved to Philly about almost 15 years ago, I fell in love with the city, and it's just
Yeah.
yeah, of course, right? It's the best place on earth. But I felt it's probably the first place I've truly ever felt at home, and in part because I just think there is a tremendous amount of just like working class energy and power for then and real desire to organize that goes back generations, right? And to transform lives and I think it's sort of a cliche how many firsts it is a city of, but I think that's just like that displays the real energy that is at stake in Philly, and just coursing through every part of the city. And I found that especially in Unite Here, the union of hospitality workers, not only did Unite Here represent hospitality workers in hotels, in the airport, in the stadiums, but also Unite Here Local 634 represents hospitality workers in the school district of Philadelphia. It represents cafeteria workers, and it represents what used to be called noontime aides, now called student climate staff, who help monitor hallways and keep schools safe. And in 2013, there were major budget cuts at the state level that led to, on the one hand, mass layoffs, the closing of schools. It was a tremendous crisis for the school district of Philadelphia and schools across the state. And in that moment, parent, teacher, student, staff organizing helped push back against the tide of austerity and transform the fortunes of not only the school district, but education in this Commonwealth. One, we unelected the Governor Tom Corbett, largely on the fact that he had failed public education. We ultimately moved to win local control of our school district through an appointed school board. Just locally, workers that I was working with went on hunger strike to win a fair contract and to win back their jobs in the school district of Philadelphia, and they won. Right? There was this huge, massive effort in Philly to transform the fortune of public education. We're still involved in that fight. We're still involved in the fight for equity, which last year we started to make a major transformational payment to school funding after winning a major court case in 2023 in Commonwealth Court, which ruled that our school funding system is unconstitutional. We're working to transform facilities, funding in across our Commonwealth, because we still have some of the oldest school buildings and some of the, worst conditions in schools, not just in Philly, but in many places in the Commonwealth. And we have new innovative programs like Representative Feeler's Solar for Schools, which is helping get solar on school buildings and reducing their costs and actually bring money to school districts and individual schools. So we, that trajectory gives me so much hope. And, I was involved in just a very small part of it when I moved to Philly. And it's one of the many reasons that I, went from being a volunteer organizer and researcher with Unite Here to being an elected official in state government and trying to see through a lot of what I first witnessed, again, in the kind of ferment of local organizing that I experienced in Philly.
It sounds like you had a lot of impact. It seems like you really were able to touch so many people's lives through that work.
I don't want to claim a huge amount of credit for what I did. I was really proud to be part of a major coalition. And I still feel that way, that I don't, I'm very proud to represent the first senatorial district. I'm proud of the work that I feel like our office has been able to accomplish in housing policy and fighting for public transit. A year and a half in my first term, we passed a major housing initiative called Whole Home Repairs, which is now, helping people to stay in their homes across the Commonwealth. But I never feel and have never felt that is an individual accomplishment. And I really think it depends on being part of a coalition of people that is seeking to make change. And it really starts with, ordinary working class people fighting for change. Again, and I really see this now, in every corner of this state. And not just the places that I represent, not just Philly, but everywhere. Building statewide power is really important to winning the things that we deserve. So I guess I feel proud of what people have been able to accomplish, and I'm proud to have been even a small part of any of it.
I'm curious, what keeps you up at night? What other priorities in Harrisburg beyond getting the state funded are you thinking about?
I literally was up, last night. I'm just mulling over a lot of things. It's a lot of things. I mean, one, transit funding is a big part of it. And, I'm just constantly concerned about when it comes to granular issues like the state of our rail cars. We had a major, flag from the NTSB, the federal agency that is involved in transportation safety around some of our rail cars. And, the fact that we need much more capital funding just for the safety and maintenance of our transit system. But also that is just a way for getting Philly and the Commonwealth to grow. We want people to be able to move around affordably and freely. And transit is such a key piece of that. And transit is really connected to housing. I think we need to be building more housing in our Commonwealth. We need to be building more affordable housing. And that's one of the things I've devoted myself to most in my time in the legislature. But the fact that we just are short at the very least 100,000 affordable homes in the Commonwealth is something that I think about constantly, and trying to figure out new creative ways to build, again, across party lines, across geographies, boundaries, to ensure that people are able to be housed. It's one of the biggest calls that we get in our office is from constituents who are struggling with housing. And so you want to be able to come up with an answer, not just an individual answer, but a structural answer to, we just lack affordable housing and for our residents.
And can you break that down? Are you talking about the rent is too high, or are you saying people can't afford their mortgages, or the price of homes are just too high? What are people actually telling you?
It's all of it. It is, it's so frankly, we're not building enough housing, not just, mostly affordable housing, but also we lack there's a huge amount of demand for just market rate housing when it comes to, say, the Philadelphia suburbs, let's say, right? And people, there's just not building enough homes to keep up with the demand for housing. And that's true in some places in Philadelphia as well. There's not enough people. A lot of people are rent burdened, which means they spend over 30% of their income on rent, which means that they just, they're spending so much on housing that it affects their ability to afford anything else. That's a huge proportion of people. Actually, it's half of Americans are struggling who are renters with that issue. The housing itself is often of poor quality. It's old. We have a great older housing stock, but people are unable to afford maintenance on their homes. And that's one issue that we've tried to tackle in state government. We created this housing program called Whole Home Repairs that is meant to help people stay in their homes by helping them with maintenance, with high utility costs, reducing energy burdens, things like that, and also helping them adapt their homes when they are struggling with disabilities. And so, all of that amounts to a rental market that's too expensive, housing that is unsafe, and not in a lack of homes, especially affordable homes. So the housing crisis is multi-pronged. And finally, I'd just say that people pay too much for energy, right? And energy costs are really high. And that would be the other thing that keeps me up at night, is the fact that we're one of the biggest fossil fuel producing states in the country. We really are not on track as a state to moving off of fossil fuel production to clean energy production. We contribute to 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions just as a state, which is way out of proportion to our population and who we are. And so we're in a real crisis. So on the one hand, people are paying too much for energy that is itself contributing to climate change and to a crisis in people's everyday lives.
Okay, Senator, so what proposals do you have to make my rent cheaper and my PICO bill a little
Great
bit
question.
less heavy?
I would say that we are we're trying we have a huge number of proposals to reduce the cost of housing. In the next few weeks, we hope to be releasing, at the very least, some co-sponsorship memos and in due course bill language that would address the cost of housing in a few particular ways. One is to make it easier to build more housing. I mean, one thing is that we have a lot of restrictions on how housing is built, whether that's housing, minimums for parking when it comes to building housing, whether that's how large or small a house can be, where that housing can be built, and whether you can, attach, rental units to your housing. When you create restrictions around how people can live and how much housing can be built, you reduce the overall amount of housing that just exists, not just obviously market rate housing, but affordable housing too. We have a lot of affordable housing projects that just get blocked by local communities because they don't want renters in their neighborhood or they don't want affordable homes in their neighborhood. And we at a state level can make the rules easier to build that housing so that we actually have enough affordable housing. We want to make it easier for people to build housing near transit so that you can live near a transit system, walk to the regional rail or Broad Street line or L, and get to work or get to places that you need to go. We also want it to be easier for people we have a lot of like adjacent housing and housing that's, that row homes, things like that, where developers will often come in and damage homes to the right or left. And we know that we experience that a lot in Philly. And so we also want to create accountability. We don't just want to make housing get built at a rapid rate, but have no accountability on how it gets built. So we'll be introducing legislation to that effect. And finally, we want to just make it easier to build more affordable housing. And so a number of states have made it possible for agencies, housing finance agencies and housing authorities to kind of provide upfront financing to build affordable housing so that we can build more of it at scale. And so we're going to be introducing legislation to do that. So that's just on housing. But there's a lot more to do when it comes to utility justice, when it comes to rent burdens. And, we've been supportive of legislation to stabilize rents are working constantly to support ratepayers, but I think there's more work to be done to lower utility costs and energy burdens across this Commonwealth.
Senator Saval, thank you so much for being on CityCast Philly today.
Thank you for having me. It's been great to be here.
That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. If you enjoyed this episode, please share this with a friend. Also, rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter, Hey Philly, to learn more about what else Philly's talking about. And don't forget, you can support our show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Philly neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.